Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at something a bit unusual.
Definitely a different kind of source material for us.
Yeah, it's called the Pastafarian Cossacks Function Report. It's written by someone calling themselves a devout Pastafarian cultural commentator and anatomical theorist.
Right, a self-proclaimed title there.
Yeah.
And we're also touching on the Gospel of the Flying Spaghetti Monster.
Exactly. So, our goal really is to understand the perspective here. This report pushes back against the common idea that our Cossack sickus the tailbone is just, a leftover tail, vestigial.
So it's asking, what is it for, according to this Pastafarian view?
That's the big question we're digging into.
Okay, so the first thing that jumps out is how it directly challenges that standard evolutionary take.
Right.
The report basically says, look, just because we haven't documented a use or don't see an obvious one now.
Doesn't automatically mean it's useless junk left over from evolution.
Precisely. And they introduce this idea, they call it the cultural obsolescence hypothesis.
Okay, what's that?
The suggestion is maybe the Cossacks had a purpose, but it's just not relevant anymore because of how our culture, our society has changed.
Ah, so its original job became obsolete, basically.
Kind of like that, yeah. And they use an interesting analogy to make this point.
The horns, right.
Yeah, horns on animals. We generally accept they have functions, defense, fighting for mates, that sort of thing. We see them as purposeful, bony growths.
We don't just dismiss them as, like, weird evolutionary accidents with no point.
Exactly. So the report asks, why the double standard? Why assume the Cossacks must be useless just because its function isn't immediately obvious to us today, unlike, say, horns?
That's a fair point to raise, framing it that way. It highlights a potential bias in how we interpret things based on current utility.
And this ties into the core Pastafarian idea here,
Yeah.
that the Cossacks wasn't an accident, but was intentionally designed by the flying spaghetti monster.
For a specific purpose. The horn analogy helps set that up, showing bony structures can have clear uses.
Right, so if it's not useless, and it might be designed, what is the proposed function?
Okay, this is where gets really specific to the source material. The report, drawing on the gospel, states its divinely intended purpose is ass fighting.
Ass fighting, yes. You heard that correctly.
It paints quite a picture, doesn't it?
It does. The idea presented is that maybe our ancestors engaged in combat backwards, using their Cossacks.
Like charging rear first.
Sort of, yeah. The analogy they draw again is maybe like elk or deer using antlers, but from the other end, competing for resources, mates, that kind of thing.
Wow, okay. And is there any proposed advantage to this unique fighting style?
Well, the gospel apparently suggests a tactical benefit if you're fighting with your rear end.
Your hands are free.
Exactly. Free to carry food, maybe rocks, other tools or items, even while you're in the middle of this ass-based skirmish.
Never thought of that. So it could have been, according to this view, a way to settle disputes or establish dominance in early Pastafarian society.
That seems to be the implication, yes. A core part of social interaction, perhaps.
Okay, this is all based on the gospel and the report's interpretation. Now, do they offer anything resembling, well, evidence for this today?
This is another really unique part of the argument. The report points to a common human reaction.
Which is?
The feeling of unease, or maybe even fear, if someone runs at you backwards. Ass first, as they put it.
Okay. I mean, that would be weird, yeah. But fear.
The report argues that this isn't just about social awkwardness. It claims it's a deep-seated, subconscious, instinctive reaction.
An instinct. Based on what?
Based on an ancestral memory. A lingering echo of a time when an ass-first charge meant danger because the Cossacks was potentially being wielded as a weapon.
So a kind of evolutionary psychology argument, but for ass fighting.
In essence, yes.
Yeah.
That our gut reaction today is proof of this forgotten function.
Certainly a creative interpretation of that kind of reaction. The report actually suggests people test this, doesn't it? Observe reactions.
It does float that as a suggestion for the curious listener's consideration, but let's be clear, we're just reporting on the text, not endorsing running backwards of people.
Right, absolutely. Disclaimer noted. Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. The core takeaway from this Pastafarian perspective.
Well, based on the gospel and this report, the Cossacks isn't seen as a useless evolutionary remnant, a vestigial tail.
Instead, it's presented as a purpose-built tool.
A deliberately designed structure intended for ass fighting.
Yeah.
A practice that perhaps faded away due to, cultural shifts, that cultural obsolescence idea again.
So, a functional body part whose function became obsolete.
That's the argument.
Okay. It definitely gives you a different lens to look through, even if it's from a very specific satirical religious text.
And maybe the final thought for you listening is, it prompts you to wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About other instincts or reactions we have.
I see.
Well, are there other seemingly inexplicable feelings or behaviors that might actually be echoes of past functions or ways of life we've completely forgotten? Things current science might overlook because the original context is gone.
That's a fascinating thought to leave people with. Could our gut feelings hold clues to a very different past? Definitely food for thought. Thanks for exploring this deep dive with us.